Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
To our panel, the Conservative Secretary of State for Wales, Stephen Crabb, Stephen Kinnock, the second generation of his family to become a Labour MP, the leader of Plaid Cymru, Leanne Wood, the authorised biographer of Margaret Thatcher, former editor of the Daily Telegraph, now columnist for that paper, Charles Moore, and the singer and political campaigner, Charlotte Church. Thank you very much. And as ever, part of the pleasure, if you're listening or watching, is to text or tweet and join in the debate. As you probably know, our hashtag is BBCQT. You can follow us at BBC Question Time. You can text comments to 83981, and you push the red button to see what others are saying. Our first question tonight from Paul Burgess, please. Mr. Burgess.
Yes. Has Jeremy Corbyn's refusal to press the nuclear button cost him any chance of becoming PM?
Jeremy Corbyn's refusal, as he said today, to press the nuclear button under any circumstance cost him his chance of becoming Prime Minister. Stephen Crabb.
I think it's the first duty of any Prime Minister is the protection of citizens of this country. And I think this week Jeremy Corbyn has failed that test massively. And it's not just on the question of him ruling out ever using Trident. Look at the comments that he's made before about attitude to the British Army. He says he can't envisage any circumstances using the British Army. Look at his attitude towards NATO, which is a kind of foundational set of relationships that we have underpinning ours and international security. He says that he's opposed to NATO. And if you think that, you know, as hard as we might want it to be the case, unfortunately we're not living in a more peaceful, more simple, less complicated world. We're living in a world where the threats are increasing and becoming more challenging. And I think for a leader of the opposition, somebody who wants to be Prime Minister and will present themselves to the country in a few years' time as a potential Prime Minister, to actually rule out using any of these cornerstones of our national defence that protect and enhance the security of our country, I think that's a deeply flawed position for the leader of the Labour Party.
Charlotte Church.
Well, I think that most people, if having to answer that question, would answer it in a similar way that Jeremy Corbyn did. I think that it's commendable. I think that if nuclear warfare occurs, then you've got the start of World War III. So I actually think that it's a really commendable place to come from to say, no, I would not be prepared to destroy thousands, hundreds of thousands of people. Yeah, I think it's a commendable place to come from.
Does that mean that were he to become Prime Minister, we would no longer have any use for Trident from the moment he became Prime Minister? Because he's the man who has to authorise its use.
Yeah, well, yeah, Trident's a totally separate issue, but I also totally agree with him in terms of Trident and, and our nuclear programme. I think that the idea that Trident keeps us safer it's not logical to me. I think it actually makes us more of a target. And I think, there are many ways in which we can protect ourselves and that we use the armed forces. There are other ways, but nuclear weapons it's the most extreme, and to me it's the most nonsensical, and the only thing that makes sense is a transparent disarmament process.
All right. Stephen Kinnock, how did you react when you heard your leader say this?
Well, of course, we are conducting a review into our defence policy. So Jeremy came forward with his view, and that's now being fed into the review. But the answer to Paul's question is, in fact, I think it's no, that it doesn't stop him being Prime Minister, because the opinion of this country is split on it. So it may well be that enough people vote for him on the basis of that policy in our manifesto, if that is the policy that is decided on by the Labour Party. But what I would also add is my personal view, based on living and working for almost 4 years in Russia. I see that as a very concerning regime. It's a place where there's total autocracy. no checks and balances. We've also got a situation where they have invaded a sovereign country and annexed it, saber-rattling, and they are sitting on top of a massive nuclear arsenal. So my personal view is we need to have a nuclear deterrent, and I will be arguing that point very forcefully within the Labour Party.
And the new Shadow Defence Secretary, Maria Eagle, appointed by him, said she didn't think a potential Prime Minister answering a question like that was helpful. Do you agree with that?
Well, it is in the middle of Maria's review, but we're having a big debate in the party.
No, but is it right for a Prime Minister, given you've got it, he's the only man who can sanction its use, is it right for him to rule it out, i.e. from the moment he becomes Prime Minister, we don't in effect have a nuclear deterrent? Is that the right action for him to say he'd take?
Jeremy's election as leader has introduced a whole different kind of politics, which is about honest, straight talking. He has campaigned against nuclear deterrence for his entire career. So for him to have stood up and said anything different, I think would have elicited some surprise from people.
But you're not confused by it as a policy?
I'm certainly not confused by Jeremy's position on it.
But
it's clear.
Yeah. Okay. All right, the man there, I'll come to him. The man in the fourth row.
Yeah, I think the question that got posed to Jeremy was pretty unfair, the way they asked the question. I mean, they reversed the question, which I could put to the panel. Which one of you would use nuclear weapons to kill millions of innocent civilians?
Charles Moore.
Because that's the opposite.
Would you like to answer the question?
Well, the point about the whole purpose of having the nuclear weapon is to avoid that. It's a deterrent. It's because these weapons exist in the world and can't be abolished, and potential enemies have them, that you need a deterrent to make it unlikely to happen. I must take up something that Stephen Kinnock said, because I think he's mistaken, unfortunately. Of course, it's fine for Jeremy Corbyn to express his view, but he didn't express his view. He said what he would do, or rather he said what he would not do. He will not order the button to be pressed, and therefore he short-circuited the whole policy review that Stephen Kinnock is talking about. We already know that the man who is the only person who, as Prime Minister, is responsible for this decision, won't make it. So that is now the Labour Party policy on Trident. Doesn't matter what all these reviews say, Prime Minister Corbyn won't press the button.
You want to come back on that?
I accept absolutely that if you're going to have a deterrent, you have to be prepared to use it.
And what do you make of the point he made, that Prime Minister would not, if it was Corbyn, would not have a deterrent in that case?
Well, we are having a policy review.
Yeah, we know that.
And the party's policy will be decided on under Maria's leadership. And if the party policy is that we will continue to be a multilateralist party, which is what we've been for the last 30 years, then Jeremy will take a position accordingly. And
so you think there are circumstances when Jeremy Corbyn, despite what he said, despite what Charlotte Church said about him, if this review, conducted by Maria Eagle, not by him, decides Britain should keep its deterrent, he will then say, oh, well, in that case, I'll be prepared to push the button? Is that what you're saying?
We'll have to take that question with Jeremy at that time, but there will be a Labour Party policy. He has launched a debate.
You can't have an argument about this. You don't have very long to make this decision. You can't have a thing, the Russians are kicking off, or whoever it is, and there's Jeremy saying, no, no, and there's Maria Eagle saying, come on, here's the button, come on, come on. I mean, it's just...
The woman up there, in the 1, 2, 3, fourth row, yes, you.
I think, isn't it just a bit childish to say, well, let's not scrap ours because so-and-so won't do it. We'll do it if so-and-so does it. It should be a decision we make on our own, and like Charlotte Church said, it is innocent people are going to be dying from this. It's not just the people that we want to kill. It's going to be loads and loads of innocent citizens, and I think nobody should make the decision to keep Trident unless they are willing to personally press that button themselves.
Okay, and the woman here on the right.
Could someone please explain how Trident or nuclear weapons are a deterrent if you're not prepared to use them, step by step through the logical process? If you're not prepared to use them, how are they a deterrent? Please someone explain really clearly how that's the case.
Well, they're not. They're not. If you're not prepared to use them, they're not a deterrent. It makes no sense to me to spend £100 billion on replacing Trident when it's not fit for purpose for the threats that face Britain today, and it's coming at a time when we're already cutting public services. So it makes more sense to me to be spending public money on providing things that are good for people as opposed to weapons which are clearly not. But I just need to ask this question to you, Stephen, really. Clearly you would use nuclear weapons then. Under what circumstances would you be prepared to actually authorise those weapons being used?
Well,
because I wouldn't.
I mean, I believe that it's the duty of a government to protect the security of its people. And as I've explained, due to my own personal experience in Russia, I have serious concerns about the regime in Moscow. I'm not going to get into a crystal ball gazing exercise in terms of which scenario you would or wouldn't use a nuclear weapon. It's clearly something that nobody ever in their right minds would ever wish to do. But for it to be a deterrent, you have to have that option.
The man there in the picture.
The question is academic. Jeremy Corbyn didn't go to Eton, so he'll never be Prime Minister anyway.
Jeremy Corbyn. Charles Moore, any truth in that?
Well, as someone who did go to Eton, I suppose I'm in the fire here. Will he be Prime Minister? I suppose I would bet not, though not for that reason. I've watched him as a journalist for more than 30 years. He and I sort of came in the business at roughly the same time. And I do think that though he's a decent and intelligent man, he's a very narrow one. He's in a very narrow set of views where they all talk to one another, talking about the same thing all the time. And he doesn't understand the wider problems that confront the whole of the British people and indeed the wider world. And I'm sure this will come out, and in fact I think we've seen this already. So his speech this week was in some ways interesting, but it was basically to his party and his party activists. And I think for the British people, he will prove to be beside the point.
Charlotte Moore, you're shaking her head at all that.
Yeah, I think, you know, the idea that, you know, he's won the biggest mandate of any party leader in history, and the way that he did it was he transcended the mainstream media, which is, you know, lucky because, you know, the propaganda that has been used against him has been frankly shocking and really undemocratic. But he has transcended that, done it through social media, done it through being on the streets, grassroots political movements, and I think that that would not leave you with a narrow view where you're talking in a feedback loop. I think that's what definitely happens with our current government, with lots of the people who are in power who really have no idea what goes on in many people's lives, in the mass people.
I'll take a couple more points. You with the spectacles, then I'll come to you beside him. Assuming you don't agree with each other. You with the spectacles first. No, you haven't got spectacles on. He has.
Sorry,
yeah.
It raises another question, though, because the way it sounds is that Jeremy
We're talking
Corbyn,
about the pushing the button.
If he was Prime Minister, it makes it sound like if he says no, that's it. Surely we should be questioning whether one person should be in charge of such a powerful weapon.
That's interesting.
And, right. But of course, technically they're not quite, because they have to get agreement of other of the United States.
If Jeremy Corbyn says no,
yes.
Why should that be the final say? One person saying no for his entire party. It seems that if no one else has an opinion, it doesn't matter.
Because he's the one who's going to press the buttons.
So what do you say beside him, yes?
Well, what I'm saying is, I feel sorry for Stephen Kinnock, who's having to be in his position and defend what your leader has done.
Thanks.
I really feel sorry for him. But there's just one country that has given up nuclear weapons.
Yes, South Africa.
No, actually, not that, but the country I was thinking of was Ukraine. And they've given up nuclear weapons, and they've been attacked by Russia. Had they had nuclear weapons,
yes.
I don't think Russia would have attacked. I don't know what Neil thinks. Sorry about that. I don't know what Stephen thinks about that.
I've had that since I was 13.
Okay. Right.
I agree that what happened with Ukraine was deeply regrettable, and I'm afraid that Ukraine was in some ways left hung out to dry by the international community. But that's why it's critically important now that we have a proper engagement with Ukraine. We have properly funded programmes to help Ukraine get back on its feet and to strengthen that country which desperately needs our assistance. And what we certainly don't need is a government that's walking away from its partners and allies in Europe at this critically important time for our partners on the fringes of of Europe.
Can I just say this?
Yes. Thank you. Yes. Yeah.
Do you know, the Labour Party, right, is all over the place on this. It wasn't that long ago that the First Minister in Wales was saying that if the Trident submarines were to be relocated from Scotland, that we should welcome them in Milford Haven. And now we've got the leader of the Labour Party elected with this position on Trident. So I don't know how they're going to arrive at a conclusion on this, and it remains to be seen whether or not Jeremy Corbyn ends up leading his party on this question, or whether his party ends up leading him.
But who said they could come to Milford Haven? It was the Tories who said that, wasn't it?
The Welsh First Minister.
Yes.
The Welsh First Minister. Yes.
It was the Labour First Minister.
Yes.
Right. You sit up there at the back.
Yeah, I completely agree what Charlotte's saying there, that for Jeremy Corbyn, you know, it's completely commendable that he is a pacifist, but being leader of the Labour Party and potentially Prime Minister, I think you've got to live in the real world as well. It's commendable that you are a pacifist and you would disagree with nuclear weapons, but for me, you've got to live in the real world, and there are a lot of people out there that don't like the United Kingdom, that want to do us for harm. And especially, I know with the terrorist threat and things like that, it's not going to help, but it's particularly with Russia on the offensive, at times like this, it would leave us significantly more vulnerable.
See, Stephen Crabb, what do you make of the point that he made, that it shouldn't be left to one person to make this decision anyway, and therefore it doesn't, in a way, matter if the Prime Minister says he won't push the button, because there'll be other people who may insist? Is that a reality, a practicality?
And the way the command chain works for whether it's a decision about use of Trident or whether it's actually going to war or any other kind of military engagement work that we undertake, there is group discussion, there is cabinet committees, and there is a process where more than one person feeds in. But at the end of the day, somebody needs to take a decision. That's what leadership is. And it's all very well for Stephen Kinnock to talk about a party review and his leader feeding in his personal view as if he's just one person amongst equals within the Labour Party. He is the leader. And as Charlotte says, he's been elected with this enormous mandate within the party. And so it's deeply problematical for the Labour Party and for the country, I would argue, as somebody who's he wants to be Prime Minister, presumably in 4.5 years' time, that he's got his party into this position where he's effectively ruling out using what would be Britain's last line of defence if we faced, and it's unthinkable, and we'd pray it would never happen, but an attack on this country
but he's never made,
from nations with nuclear weapons.
But he's never pretended otherwise, and he got elected on that basis. So it would be undemocratic to say he can't become Prime Minister.
And what does that say in terms of Jeremy Corbyn now trying to present himself as some kind of listening pragmatist? The fact that he hasn't changed his views in 40 years actually shows that this guy is an unbending ideologue who's held in a very fixed way to a narrow set of ideas. I mean, it's the kind of ideas that when your dad ran the Labour Party in the 1980s, Stephen, he was trying to push them out because they made the Labour Party unelectable.
What I would say... What I would say very briefly to that is possibly one of the most important elements of leadership is compromise. And we will see what happens with this defence review. If this defence review concludes that we should continue with the policy we've held for 30 years of being a multilateralist party, then I would think that Jeremy will look at that and say, well, is this a time for me to compromise? I don't
want to go back to
crystal
what
ball gaze on
Charlotte Church said, but I mean, if it's an absolute point of principle for him that he would never, ever, ever use a nuclear deterrent, how could he possibly compromise on it?
I can't speculate on that. All I'm saying is that I think that one important aspect of leadership is compromise. And so Jeremy is now in a position of being the leader of the Labour Party and taking a lot of very complex decisions based on consultations with a lot of different people. But I'm not here, I'm not able to crystal ball gaze as to what the outcome of Maria's review will be.
Charles Moore, does that reassure you that he might actually come round to that way of thinking and
no, of course not. Of course not. Because of course not. It doesn't, because everybody, like Charlotte here and some of the audience here tonight and so on, who believe in Jeremy Corbyn, if he were to say that he was going to press a button, then that rug would be pulled from under him. So all this support that got him there. And Charlotte's quite right that it's a lot of people relative to who normally votes in a party election, but it's still only 0.55% of the whole British electorate has put him there. So it makes absolutely no difference to the ultimate result. It's a tiny fraction. If that fraction sees him, as they would see it, betraying, that's the end of him, isn't it? So he's caught by that.
The woman there in the second row.
I think that Jeremy Corbyn at the moment can say what he wants, because I don't believe he thinks he will ever get as far as the general election as leader of the Labour Party. But if he does, God help us all, because we're not going to push a button. Russia, China, North Korea, they can have a field day with us.
Okay. And you, sir, and then we'll go on.
Jeremy Corbyn disrespects our brave armed services. He disrespects the Queen. He disrespects our national anthem. He praises the IRA when the West at the moment is weak and flabby and frightened of Russia. He should be charged with treason.
I would take, well, there's lots of hands up. I'll take a point from you two, if you're side by side in the second row back. You first, and then you beside.
I think fundamentally the job of a Prime Minister and a government is to protect its citizens, is to look after its citizens, and to even think about compromising that by removing Trident. We don't know where we're going to be in 5 years' time. To remove Trident and non-nuclear deterrent when the world is so uncertain, I think massively compromises that, and someone like that should not be leader of the country.
And the person on your right, do you agree with her?
I don't agree with that, no. I think a few people have spoken about the real world as if that's something kind of fixed and immutable and can't be changed, but it's regrettable, but oh, well, it is what it is. But the leaders of the countries make what the real world is, and I would be so much more proud to be British if we were a country that was going out into the world leading for peace, instead of accepting...
And yes, you with spectacles in the centre there.
Just going to say that war and weapons don't bring peace, and nor does bombing a country down kill off terrorism. It creates terrorism, and that's what we're fighting against. And should we not be working together internationally to fight that and not cause more wars and build more weapons?
Okay, thank you very much. OK, well, let's move on to another question. But just before we do, we're going to be in Leicester next week with Question Time, and then we're going to be in Dover the week after that. The details are on the screen, how to apply, and I'll give them again at the end of the programme. Let's take a question from Charlotte Jones, please. Charlotte Jones.
Why do you think Plaid Cymru isn't as successful as the SNP?
Why is Plaid Cymru, the Welsh nationalists, not as successful, not just as successful, a washout compared with the SNP in Scotland? Why is it? Stephen Kinnock.
Thank you. Well, I think it's quite simple that the people of Wales are not interested in independence, and the final analysis is that the Plaid Cymru's flagship policy is an independent Wales, and when you've got the polls showing somewhere between 3 and 5% of the population in favour of your flagship policy, well, to coin a phrase, do the math.
All right. Leanne Wood, you'll have an uphill struggle, but you had all the exposure during the campaign of those the three women on that. Was it the Question Time one? I can't remember which of the ones it was, but anyway, when everybody said what a star you'd been, and yet I think your percentage of the vote went up by 1% only, from 11 to 12 or 10 to 11 or something like that. Why is it not popular, Plaid Cymru in Wales?
Well, I think our time hasn't come yet.
Ah. Say that again.
If you look at the situation that we have in Wales now, we've had a Labour government since the beginning of devolution. That's 17 years that we've had a Labour First Minister, a Labour Health Minister, a Labour Education Minister, and on all three of those policy areas, in terms of health, education and the economy, Wales is not performing well, and in terms of comparisons with other parts of the UK, we're performing pretty poorly. So it's time to replace the Labour government that we have, and Plaid Cymru is going all out over this next year, ahead of next year's Assembly elections, to put forward a credible programme offering solutions to those problems in prioritising those areas of health, education and the economy. And once we get into government, I think that you will see things changing. And I've got to take
You're going into
issue...
government with the Tories in Wales, then?
No, we won't be going into
Who are
government.
you going to government with then?
Well, I want there to be a Plaid Cymru government.
But you're so many miles away, and it's like a sort of distant hilltop, isn't it, to you?
Well, OK, you've got to aim for the top of the hill, though. And look, if you look at the situation where the SNP were prior to when they formed the government in 2007, they were way behind as well. And everybody told them that it wasn't possible for them to form a government too. So I don't accept that it's not possible. What it means is that people need to get behind us as an alternative government. I need to take dispute with the issue that Stephen Kinnock raised and he said that we're all about independence. Independence is something that Plaid Cymru wants to see in the long term, but we know that we're nowhere near being able to achieve that under our current situation. Our economy is too weak. We're already facing a situation where workers in Wales earn 85 pence for every pound of the UK average. Our GDP is way behind 78% of the UK average. Those are the things that we need to tackle and improve before people are in a position to be able to make the choice that any other normal nation in the world can make, and that is to end its dependence on others.
You, sir. You, sir. And I'll come to you. Yes.
I'm sorry, Leanne. Everything that you've just said has backed up everything that I actually think. That the Assembly is not working, 17 years down the line, education is poor, health is poor. Why don't we just get rid of the Assembly, give it to Stephen as Welsh Secretary, have a Welsh office, and then maybe the Tories can actually do something in Wales and stop them being a third world country.
And you, sir. Yes.
I think it's all well and good that Plaid Cymru sort of advocates the social mobility, anti-austerity, pro-European politics, like in the general election and like what you just said. But at the end of the day, your core message is division, divorce, breaking up the UK, taking Wales out of one of the best economies in the world, a country with 3 million people. You want to remove from a country of 65 million people with a strong economy. So you can say what you want about social mobility, improving the Welsh economy, but when that's your core message, there's no way the Welsh people are going to get behind that. And I think you know it.
Stephen Crabb, as Secretary of State for Wales, would you like to take back all the powers that you were being offered on the right here and run Wales yourself?
Well, what I want matters less than what actually the people of Wales want. And we've had 2 referenda in Wales in the last 20 years, and on both occasions, a majority, the first time with a narrow majority, the second time with a much larger majority, much larger than even I was anticipating. The majority of people in Wales said not just that they want to keep devolution, but they want more powers. They wanted the Assembly to have full law-making power, so effectively for the Assembly to become a parliament. So regardless of whether I think the Secretary of State should have back his old powers or not, my view is irrelevant. The people of Wales have made their choice. So the challenge for us is how do we come up with a devolution settlement that actually works in the best interests of Wales, but recognises the point that Stephen Kinnock made absolutely correctly, which the people of Wales, almost on a wholesale basis, reject a desire for political independence from the United Kingdom. People of Wales are much more pragmatic than that. They're fiercely patriotic. They want a greater say over their own affairs within Wales. So that's why we've ended up with devolution. But they actually reject the notion that I'm afraid Leanne campaigns for, which is a breakup of the United Kingdom.
Again, we're not campaigning for independence. We are campaigning to form the government.
So what's the point of Plaid Cymru?
Well, because we want to strengthen... We want to strengthen the devolution settlement that we have, and we want to take more autonomy so that we can take more decisions for ourselves. It makes sense for people to take decisions closer to them. Our economy at the moment is weak, and part of the reason for that is because it's tied to a system that doesn't work in our interests. But independence is not on the agenda for Plaid Cymru now today. What we need to do next is not abolish the Assembly, as you've said. It's not devolution that's caused the problems that Wales are facing now. It's the Labour Party that's caused those problems. You wouldn't look at Westminster and say there are problems being caused by the Westminster Parliament, so let's therefore abolish Westminster. No, you'd argue for a change in the government. And that's what we have to do in Wales. We have to replace this tired, incompetent government that has been run by Labour for 17 years, and it needs to be replaced by Plaid Cymru. Plaid Cymru is the change Wales needs.
Stephen Crabb, what would happen if, when the referendum comes, England votes to leave the EU and Wales votes to remain in it?
Well, that referendum will be taken on a UK-wide basis, and that will be the franchise. And
but we know, the suspicion is that from Scotland's point of view, it will increase the pressure for independence in Scotland if that happens. Would it do the same in Wales?
No, I don't think it would. I think every opinion poll that's been taken in Wales show that people of Wales, their views on Europe and our future in Europe are pretty much aligned with the rest of the UK. I mean, Scotland, it's slightly
different. We don't know what the UK's view is at the moment, do you?
Well, it depends on how much you trust opinion polls, and we've all
we all know about
My understanding is that the last poll showed that there was a slight majority in England to come out of the EU, and there was a slight majority in Wales to remain in. So under your proposals that your party is pushing ahead with, which is incidentally causing massive uncertainty for business and organisations in Wales, then England could potentially pull Wales out against our will, and that's not on.
OK, you sir in the front row here.
As I listen to this argument, the real issue is we have a 17-year Labour government now in power, yet we've lost 100,000 manufacturing jobs, and we have all of these economic boondoggles that have been out there, nothing that really develops business and brings business into Wales. When are we going to address the economy and building jobs so that 70% of the people of Wales aren't living in some form off of the government teat?
Absolutely right.
Charlotte Church. The question was, why do you think Plaid Cymru is not as successful as the SNP?
Well, for a myriad of reasons. I think that that people in Scotland were more ready, were looking for an alternative. Labour wasn't offering that. Labour weren't left enough for the ideologies in Scotland that were most popular. And I think, as Leanne said, you know, it was their time, but it was a very quick rise, and that doesn't mean that Plaid Cymru are always going to be trailing behind. I think that lots of Plaid's policies are incredible and have, you know, and lots of the Labour policies which are coming out now into Jeremy Corbyn, Plaid have backed for years, have been Plaid policies for a number of years, and I think that, you know, for Labour in Wales to have said, you know, because of what has happened with education in Wales, and there's been, you know, rather a mess made of it, that what Labour said in response to that was, we've taken our eye off the ball, is farcical, really. So I definitely think that the Labour Party in Westminster is a very different thing to the Labour Party in Wales, and I absolutely welcome more diversity on a political spectrum that Plaid offers.
Charles Moore.
Well, I have to be careful here because I'm the only person with no Welsh connections at all on this panel. So I must go cautiously, otherwise I shall look like John Redwood trying to sing the Welsh national anthem. But I just think this, it's an interesting statistic, which not many people in the broader United Kingdom know, that more people at the last election in Wales voted for UKIP than for Plaid Cymru. So more people are concerned about the independence of the United Kingdom in Wales than they are for the independence of Wales. That's quite a striking statistic. I'm not a supporter of UKIP myself, but I just make that point. And I do think it's very important to get all this in perspective. It is absolutely ridiculous in the modern world to try and split up a well-functioning democracy like ours, like the United Kingdom. It can produce great pettiness. Of course, I admire the Scottish nationalist skills in capitalising on the moribund nature of the Labour Party in Scotland and the discontent. But fundamentally, they have a very negative message, and a rather dangerous message, because they want to create a tight little place which they run. It's their gang, and they want to run it, and it will be very unplural and very undiverse, and quite alarming for anyone who doesn't agree with them.
But maybe
we don't want that. In the United Kingdom, we are a very diverse society, and we should be proud of that fact. It does actually, contrary to many of the criticisms, work, and we've got to make sure that we keep it working.
Yes, but it works. Yeah, it works in its majority for England and for the Westminster elite. And a lot of all of the big decisions, a lot of the money is centralised in England. And so you have to look at why people are thinking like this in Scotland and in Wales, and you have to address those problems rather than saying it's better to be together. Why don't you want to be a part of this really successful economy? Yes, great, but also, you know, we need. You know, it's so disproportionate, the amount of money that Wales is given, even compared to Scotland, and lots of money that is fed throughout the country. And there's some of the reasons why there is malcontent, and you need to understand that.
But yes, you're right, but of course the Welsh are not voting in the way that you say.
I'm not saying that they're voting that way, but I'm saying that you know, those factions of discontent are there, and you need to understand why.
I'm going to try another pair. We've done pairs quite well tonight. The two women sitting here in the front. I'll take you in yellow first, and then the person on your right.
Surely, when you've got a third of Welsh children living in poverty, that needs to be your priority before you even start to think about nationalising Wales.
Okay, and the woman on your right?
Well said, Charlotte. I mean, I think it's interesting. We've got a Welsh secretary sitting here, and actually, have we really looked at the amount of money that is actually allocated to Wales and the impact that that has on Wales and the decisions it has to make about how that money is then spent on health and education and developing the economy? And we don't get our fair share.
Stephen Kinnock, do you agree with that?
What I would say is that in spite of the fact that the block grant to Wales has been cut by £1.3 billion in the last 5 years, we've got record levels of employment here. We have record levels of foreign direct investment. We've got the best GCSE results ever, cracking A-level results as well. 90% satisfaction in Welsh NHS services, lower cancer waiting times than in England. So in spite of all that, because of under Carwyn's fantastic leadership, we have managed to actually deliver real quality public services in Wales and in very difficult times, because there's been innovation and there's been a fresh approach in Wales, and I would say that we are in an excellent position to get a very good result in the Assembly elections next year.
Well, thank you. I'll take a couple more points, but very briefly, if you would. The man in the blue shirt, and then you, Sue, have had your hand up for some time. Yes.
I was just going to say, Leanne, you seem to be blaming Labour a lot for the kind of lack of success of Plaid, when surely the party should be looking at itself first. And maybe that's part of the problem of why you've not done so well.
I was just wondering to the point about devolution, in terms of
and the man in spectacles there, you, sir.
Yeah, Leanne, I think it's a shame you won't work with the Conservative Party, because Wales is absolutely crying out for a change of government in the Assembly. We've had Labour for ages, and especially on education. When I left school 5 years ago, the only thing I was qualified to do was stand in a job queue. It's absolutely shameful what you've done to hundreds of thousands of young people in Wales with your record in education.
So what do you want her to do?
Work with any other party. You should work together. There's a broad range of views in Wales. It's very bigoted for you to just say, oh, 20% of people who vote Conservative, we're not going to represent them. Our priority is to get Labour out.
Would you think the Tories should work with Plaid Cymru and get Labour out?
Yeah, I mean, as unthinkable as it might be, we should be looking at all possible options, because the point the gentleman makes is absolutely right. What is really unhealthy for Wales is actually unhealthy for the Welsh Labour Party, is that they just carry on election after election, just assuming that they will always be in government. And Leanne, what we need to hear from you tonight is you rule out forming a coalition with Welsh Labour and ensuring that they just carry on.
I'm going to go on. Thank you very much indeed. I'm going to go on to another question. This from Will Hingley, please. Will Hingley.
Now Russia are bombing Syria, is it time that the UK rules out airstrikes in the region?
Should the UK... Prime Minister was going to revisit this in the autumn, the issue of whether Britain should be allowed by Parliament to conduct airstrikes, not just over Iraq, but inside Syria as well. Charlotte Church.
I think that at the moment, what is happening in Syria and the amount of different forces at play there, and you know that Russia have gone in and they're apparently bombing the Syrian rebel army, that if the UK and America went in, that it would be ISIS, then eventually the Syrian people are left with Assad, who has killed 7 times more civilians than ISIS. So shouldn't we really be asking what the people of Syria want? Who is their enemy from inside? You know, but also this country has been decimated, it's been destroyed. And I do not think that more bombs are the answer. I don't know what the answer is. I should imagine it has something to do with really careful, patient diplomacy and as much understanding as is possible. But, you know, you're working with extremists and, well, not working with, but up against extremists and terrorism, and, you know, it's terrifying. I get that, but I don't think that dropping bombs in a place where there's already been 20,000 bombs dropped is the answer. Another interesting thing with Syria, actually, which the people that I've spoken to, lots of people don't seem to know about this, but there is evidence to suggest that climate change was a big factor in how the Syrian conflict came about, because from 2006 to 2011 they experienced one of the worst droughts in its history, which of course, you know, meant that there was water shortages and crops weren't growing. So there's a mass migration from rural areas of Syria into the urban centres, which put more strain, and, you know, there was resources were scarce, etc., which apparently did contribute to the conflict there today. And so, you know, when we're looking at, you know, no issue is an island, you know, when we're trying to look at all of the different factors in this. So I think that we also need to look at, you know, what we're doing to the planet and how that might actually cause more conflict in the world.
Charles Moore, Russia and America both now unleashing bombs in Syria. Should the UK rule out doing the same?
It certainly shouldn't rule it out, but I think you have to look at how extraordinary the situation is. Something happened this week which I'm very surprised people don't pay more attention to it. This is the first time that Russia has launched a military intervention in the Middle East since 1941, when they were our allies against Hitler. And it's an extraordinary event that this great power is starting to drop bombs on Syria and throwing its weight around in this way. And you have to ask, why is it happening? And the reason it's happening is because of the total failure of the West to try to address this situation. Now, that comes primarily, of course, we're only secondaries, it comes primarily from the United States. I'm afraid I think President Obama's foreign policy in this region is a disgrace, because he has not supported any of his friends. He didn't know what to do after the Arab Spring. He said he had a red line about chemical weapons, and then the red line was crossed and he did nothing about it. His foreign policy is that I'm not like Bush. Well, fine, I well understand that, and many people support that, but it's not, that's not the whole of a foreign policy.
What should he have done?
Well, he has to, if he wants to be, as he says, humbler in the world, he has to face the fact that then America and the West will be humbled, and they'll be humbled by nastier people. And that's what's happening. So Russia is becoming the great power in that region, and Russia is a tyrannous and violent power, and this is very bad for Syria. And therefore, before we can talk about airstrikes, we might, in fact, have to have airstrikes, but we have to have a foreign policy. We have to be trying to work out what do we want in this region. And President Obama, and I'm afraid as long as he's in office, we are not going to be told that. He is determined not to say anything about that, and as a result, there is actual collapse in the whole of the region.
Stephen Kinnock.
Well, I think we have to learn the lessons of previous interventions, which is if you don't have a clear political and diplomatic strategy, you shouldn't be using a military strategy. So I think what we need to see here is a recognition of the fact that of the 250,000 people that have died as a result of this awful war in Syria, President Assad bears the majority of the responsibility for that. And I think we need to have a clear vision of what a post-Assad Syria looks like. And that should be our priority. Jeremy Corbyn and Hilary Benn have submitted a draft resolution for the United Nations Security Council, which takes into account all of the diplomatic and political options that we need to have on the table. And I think that that has to be the priority now. If we are looking at military action against ISIL, we have to be absolutely clear what the impact of that will be on President Assad. Will it shore him up for even longer, and there is a risk of that happening. I think that's a risk we have to take very seriously, but ultimately we need our government now to come forward with a clear plan, because at the moment we're just grasping at straws.
It's said you're going to have a free vote, according to John McDonnell, on this, on the Labour side. Would you vote in favour of bombing Syria if it came to that in the House of Commons?
I would have to have a very clear picture from the government as to how bombing ISIL in Syria would actually benefit.
But you wouldn't rule it out?
I am sceptical, and at the present time, I think that there's a great opportunity to re-engage Iran. The fantastic achievement of re-engaging Iran through the P5+1 process on the nuclear deal. Iran is now more open than it's ever been to an engagement, and of course we know that they are, in the end, Syria is a proxy war. It's Iran and Russia on the one side and Saudi Arabia and other allies on the other. So let's look very carefully at the options diplomatically now. Bring Iran in. They have huge influence over Assad. I would not say that bombing at this time is going to help us in that diplomatic endeavour.
You, sir.
Yeah, how long have we been bombing now for, though? I mean, the idea that we just need to keep bombing, it's not going to work. I mean, we managed to destroy the Iraqi army of 35,000 in 3 weeks. Why has this not been done? ISIS estimates around about 35,000 members. This could have been over years ago if you'd have just got it sorted. I don't understand why we are still just bombing round the edges.
You think IS could have been destroyed?
Well, we managed to destroy the Iraqi army in 3 weeks. 35,000 members, tanks, the lot. This is a bunch of ragtag people with stolen equipment.
Stephen Crabb?
Well,
what do you say to him?
The one thing they're not is just a bunch of ragtag people. They have access to incredibly sophisticated technology.
Unlike the Iraqi army?
They're using forms of brutality which we'd thought had disappeared from the face of this earth, and they've proven themselves to be very effective in winning territory across Iraq and Syria. There's two big things going on in Syria, and they are interrelated. One is the Syrian civil war, which probably none of us really here really fully understand. And that's a question of whether Assad remains in power. And we've been very clear that Assad cannot be part of the solution to Syria's long-term security. The other thing that's happening inside that desperately poor country that's been ravaged by warfare, as you rightly say, is the establishment of ISIL and the caliphate, which extends over international borders. And the immediate priority we see is the destruction of ISIL. I think there's a positive role and a constructive role potentially for Russia to play in that, and they've got a choice about whether they're going to play a benign role on the world stage. But so far they look like they just want to prop up their ally Assad, and that can't be.
Do you want to see the British government put forward in the House of Commons a resolution that Britain will bomb ISIL in Syria?
Well, 2 years ago, we tried to bring forward a resolution.
I know, but do you want it brought forward again now?
And I haven't seen any evidence to suggest that actually there's a less of a role for Britain to play. But
you haven't answered my question. Do you want to see it brought forward again to the House of Commons? I think because there is an argument that enough Labour people would support it for it to get through.
Well, we would only bring it forward if we were really sure that it was going to command a large degree of consensus in the House of Commons. No one would bring it forward for it to get rejected again. That would make a mockery of us, of the United Kingdom on the world stage. So really the onus is on the Labour Party to try to work with us and try to understand this situation at a deeper level.
How do you discover whether they'll support you unless you go to a vote?
Well, there's lots of ways you can get to before a vote
really?
of discovering the opinion of the other party. And I'm looking at Stephen here, and
I'm all ears.
We'll be having discussions.
I'm all ears.
You said in the third row.
It seems staggeringly obvious that we should be using military power to assist the forces fighting ISIS in Syria wherever it's possible that they can be of use. If we'd been able to use them while ISIS were advancing on Kobane before they trashed that city and killed a third of its occupants, that is something that British armed forces could have been doing that was useful. We've been so badly burned by the failure of diplomatic and military policy in Iraq that now, and since 2012, when we could have made a real difference in the Arab Spring, we've been too afraid to use our armed forces where and when they could have done a huge amount of good in the world.
Leanne Wood, can you respond to that point?
Well, I just can't see how more airstrikes, more bombs are going to help the situation.
It's perfectly obvious. If you have ISIS advancing on Kobane and they can be stopped by the use of Western air power, that helps, doesn't it?
But you said if, and we have no idea that that will actually be the outcome, and we have no idea that civilians will be taken out in the interim. And given that there are so many different interventions in the region now, ramping up tensions, there's a real possibility of accidental hits potentially between the USSR and, Russia and the United States. There's the danger of civilians. There has to be all effort now put to try and bring people around the table.
You want to come back on this?
To talk.
Yeah, let's just assume that ISIS aren't keen on coming around the table, and let's assume that what they've said over the last week, that they actually want to inflict nuclear destruction on the West if they can get their hands on nuclear weapons, might be right. These aren't people who in all circumstances are amenable to negotiation. These are people who need to be shown that the West has both the power and the will to intervene where its forces can be of military use, and that's what we should be doing.
We should be asking ourselves the question what role our government's intervention back in 2003 had in creating this mess that is now in the Middle East, and how on earth can our government make the situation better after that?
Our government failed. Our government failed in 2003 because there was no clear military plan and no political plan for the occupation of Iraq following a highly successful invasion.
Charles Moore, a brief point, and then I want to...
Just to add to that very well-argued point coming from the questioner, you have to search for the right interlocutors in the region, which failed to be done in 2003, and we haven't even begun to do that. You know, we do have allies there, like Jordan, for example, that has a very difficult role. There are a lot of good movements within Syria, but of course they don't get many recruits right now because they're terrified. Who would join them when they're not being backed by America and Britain, when other things are nasty ones are being backed by Iran, Hezbollah, Russia? It's a matter of working out what you want and finding the people and then exerting that power in cooperation with those people. We've done it before and we can do it again, but we've entirely lost the will to do it. And therefore we are permitting a great genocide and also a huge disruption of the world order, which means, among other things, that hundreds of thousands of people are trying to get into our continent.
Well, the refugee crisis is not going to end.
Right.
The refugee crisis is going to continue. More and more bodies are going to be washed up in the Mediterranean if we don't pursue peace.
All right, I'm going to move on because we've talked about that before on Question Time. We will come back to it, I've no doubt, time and again. But we've got 5 minutes left. Sally Harms, please.
Jeremy Corbyn has threatened to renationalise the railways if the Labour Party were to come into power in 2020. Do you consider this sensible?
Should we renationalise the railways? You have to be brief on this one because you've only got 5 minutes. Charles Moore, you're a railway traveller. Do you think they should be nationalised?
No, I think it's completely mad, actually. But and I think they do, in fact, work much better than when they were nationalised now. Just much, much better.
OK, thank you. Stephen Kinnock?
I think that the example of the East Coast Line shows us how beneficial it can be to have public ownership. Once there was a disastrous management under the private sector, that collapsed, it went into public ownership, customer satisfaction went up, prices of tickets went down, profitability of the company went up. So I think that there's a very strong case for publicly owned national railways.
And this is this is one policy that unites the Shadow Cabinet?
I think it well might be, yes.
Stephen Crabb?
No, I don't agree they should be renationalised. The privatisation of the railways has meant that we're now carrying twice as many people on our railways each day than previously. We've got the biggest programme of investment into our railways since Victorian times. You wouldn't have got that under the days of British Rail, and you certainly wouldn't have got British Rail making the rugby trains work properly.
How do you account for 59% of people, according to YouGov, who we now know always get things right, supporting it, and 48% of Conservative voters supporting it?
I think there's a lot of nostalgia around railways, aren't there? And people do think back to an age of steam and these kind of things. The truth is that whether people say they support it or not, the privatised rail industry has actually delivered higher satisfaction ratings, twice as many passengers, and the biggest programme of investment in our railways.
Could you just guarantee that there will be full electrification of the line all the way to Swansea?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thanks. That's on the record.
Clear answer.
Nationalisation. Where was the government this week to save the 1,700 jobs up in Redcar? The steelworks now has gone to the wall. Why didn't they step in and save the jobs? Whether it be temporary or permanent, surely the government could step in and kept the steelworks going.
Do you think Labour would have nationalised Redcar?
I don't know. Is it Stephen Kinnock?
We better not go down that route. Let's just stick with the railways and get it sorted out. No, well, I'll come back to it. Okay. But Leanne Wood, briefly, if you would, because we've only got a few minutes left.
Yes.
Are you in favour of renationalising the railways?
I support a publicly owned railway system, and Plaid Cymru, the Party of Wales, have been calling for this for years.
OK, the man in the blue shirt there.
The general problem with the railways that people tend to think is the value for ticket prices. And that's what most people are concerned about. If you renationalise the railways, the ticket prices will not go down. The cost of running the railway will roughly remain the same. To put into the panel here, if we did renationalise the railways under Corbyn, which I completely disagree with, I work for the railway personally, what incentives would there be for customers to, a monopolistic public sector railway to improve the service for customers?
OK. And Sally, who asked the question, what do you think?
I personally don't agree with it, seeing as most prospering countries in the world at the moment are privatising, not nationalising.
Okay.
But that's just my view.
Charlotte Church.
I think that two of the most famous rail networks in the world, being Japan and France, both own their railways are publicly owned. I think that it's become an elitist way of travel, so you've got not as much social mobility as you could have with a cheaper rail service. Yeah, so I absolutely believe in the renationalisation.
OK. I'll come back to you, Stephen Kinnock, before we finish on this nationalisation point the man made there. If you're willing to nationalise the railways, what about nationalising steel? You've got problems in Port Talbot. You've had Redcar gone into closure for the moment. Would you extend nationalisation to steel? And other industries?
I don't think that full nationalisation is an option for the steel industry because it's a global competitive environment. Rail is different because there's a monopoly situation.
Would you subsidise it like the Italians are said to do?
Well, I think that that's certainly an option that's worth looking at, but what we really need to see is some leadership from this government. There's a lot more they could be doing in terms of dealing with crippling energy bills, massive dumping of steel by the Chinese, and this government is literally asleep at the wheel when it comes to the steel industry, and as a result of its being asleep at the wheel, we're now seeing massive job losses in Redcar and huge threats to the industry. Other countries in Europe, governments are standing up for steel, and it's about time we saw this government do the same.
Yeah, briefly. Briefly.
I completely disagree, and I think Stephen Kinnock doesn't have all of the facts to hand. The fact is that the British taxpayer has been giving money to the steel companies, helping them with their energy costs. The British government's been very active pursuing the dumping issue of cheap Chinese steel coming into Europe. So we are all over this, but what you can't escape from, there is a massive global problem in the steel industry. That's the fact.
The man at the very back there, you say you haven't got much time left, so be brief if you would.
I actually work on the railway, and it'd be the same amount of job losses if it was nationalised. The way it's going, it's all right. There's a lot of people from South Wales, Merthyr, Cardiff, all working on the railway, so keep it as it is.
You don't want to see nationalisation?
No.
No, OK. And yes, the person there, that hand, you, yes.
Taking into account that a lot of these train providers have a period of monopoly on certain lines, do you believe they should be more liable for underinvestment in the rail, an increase in fares, and sort of late trains and poor services as sort of been exemplified by the Rugby World Cup?
You think they should be more toughly governed, do you?
I agree, yeah.
As exemplified by what?
The current Rugby World Cup situation, the problems that people have had with trains has been widely reported.
Yeah, it took us several hours to get here, and I think we better stop because it's going to take us several hours to get home again.
I've been getting away with it all my